Superhero games are bigger than ever. I'd argue better than ever. Gone are the days of the hit and miss movie tie-ins from the excellent Spider-Man 2 and X-Men Origins Wolverine to whatever Thor God of Thunder was and The Amazing Spider-Man 2. There's a higher quality bar with superhero games now. It begun with the Batman Arkham series and it's continued with Insomniac's Spider-Man and many more titles. And with that, there's an abundance on the horizon, particularly from Marvel games. Though today, I want to do something a little different. Despite a plethora of games on the way, from Iron Man to Wonder Woman to a PvP Marvel shooter, I want to talk about the heroes that haven't got the spotlight yet. Those that deserve it, those that would lend themselves beautifully to a video game project and immerse yourself in that world and give you that power fantasy of that hero. So with that said, let's dive into the missing superhero video games. But before we get rolling, if comic book video games content is what you're after, consider subscribing because that's exactly what we do here. Right, let's go. Let's get the elephant in the room out of the way, shall we? Because right now, he probably holds the title for the worst superhero video game on the market. Let's talk Superman. Where's my damn Superman game? Superman fans have been starving out here for a long time. Evil Superman after evil Superman to dead Superman. But maybe now it's going to start looking up for Superman fans. James Gunn's Superman kicks off the DCU next year. Well, technically Creature Commandos, but that's not the point. And if there's anyone who can pull off a fantastic Superman project, it's him. So maybe it's time for things to start looking up for Superman fans. So what about the video game front? Can a Superman game be made? Can he satisfy fans? And how do you make a video game around a character whose power scale knows no bounds? It's a monumental task, no doubt. Yet, I think it's time. Video game technology has progressed to a point where both environmental destruction and the faster loading tech, I think you can finally truly capture Superman and feel like him now. I do think that with this, we would have to make a concession. You can't be expecting to pummel people across the globe and the continent, to fly through the buildings and really capture that feeling of Superman. I think as fans, there would have to be a concession made there because I don't think it's really possible to capture everything about Superman and be 100% realistic. The point is, I don't need this to be a perfect encapsulation of Superman. I just need a fantastic Superman and Clark Kent story and a good enough gameplay and sandbox to immerse me and make me feel like him in some way. I just want to fly around Metropolis, beat up some bad guys, and just experience what it is to fly around, help people out, and be in that Metropolis and world. And we've had that Metropolis in Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. We had that amazing, immersive DC sandbox that just felt right for a Superman game, and it really feels like now is the time to give us that Superman and Metropolis game. Look, I really do believe that a Superman game is one of the most difficult projects in a video game to pull off. From his power set, to kind of explain the rationale of it, to then creating a great Superman story. But I think now's the time, now more than ever, and I don't need perfection. I think it's just time for a Superman game. But I think it's time for someone to take a crack at it than just wait for this perfect scenario that I'm not sure ever really exists. Plus, Superman is only going to get bigger and bigger now with what James Gunn and hopefully the DCU will do, and it's time for a good Superman story for Clark Kent, Lois Lane, and Superman, and build around those characters as the central part of it, in the same way that Insomniac Spider-Man built around Peter, Mary Jane, and Miles, and then had that core group of characters in there. Like, I've been reading a lot of DC comics recently, and I recently read Superman Birthright, and I'm just like, what? I get it now. Like, Superman is a great character, and it doesn't have to be boring. Plus, it's going to sell crazy. Switching universes, Marvel games are firing on all cylinders right now. We've got a Black Panther and Cap game, a solo Black Panther game, Wolverine, Iron Man, a PvP shooter, Blade, and of course the inevitable Spider-Man 3. And yet, there's still a ton of characters out there to go and explore. The MCU has popularised these characters now more than ever. But I want to talk about a character that wasn't popularised by the MCU, but by a Netflix show. I think it's time for a Daredevil game, don't you? It just feels blatantly obvious. He seems a perfect fit for a clone of the kind of Arkham game format that we've been so used to. But on top of that, I feel like he's so much more than just an Arkham game. Like, you could really do some interesting things with the visuals and the mechanics of the game, and leading into the fact that he's blind and how that can look visually on the screen as you're playing it. On top of that, one thing that I've always thought about is that dual identity in these superhero games. Of course, it's a really hard balance to get right, but I'd love to spend some time playing with Matt Murdock and seeing how like the two lives combine together, so that actually it's some kind of gameplay experience where maybe you're actually trying to put these people away, or you're trying to defend people, and there's some kind of system going on with Matt's job as a lawyer. I think that could be really cool on a gameplay front. Not something that I want to take center stage, but let's say you put like you can't put a group of criminals away, and that comes back to bite you later on, and they kind of run rampage through the city. That could be pretty cool as a concept, I think. Of course, playing a superhero game, you want the moveset and the power scale of these characters, but for me, what dictates a really good superhero game is the human side of the story and the character. That's just as important. I've always kind of hoped that an Insomniac Spider-Man game, Daredevil would just show up, and people are like, just let Insomniac create a Daredevil game, but like, I promise you, there are more studios than just Insomniac to make a superhero game. I know before that I mentioned an Arkham-style combat for Daredevil, but also, could you imagine like a Metroidvania in Hell's Kitchen? That could work pretty sick, and the stylistic nature of how that could look, that could be a really good option for a Daredevil game too. I think Daredevil himself can lend himself to many genres, and he has such a great rogues gallery, and there's so many things that you could do with Daredevil, so I'm surprised we haven't had a Daredevil game yet, other than the rumours and actually the leaked video of that cancelled Daredevil game a while back now. Sticking with Marvel, I think what's extremely important is that you don't get to a point where all the games feel samey. That they aren't just all third-person action-adventure games, and even if they are, what's the differentiating factors? For example, Arkham games and the Spider-Man games, they're both third-person action games, but the combat feels inherently different, and what you do outside of the combat feels like a switch-up. So, when's Hulk gonna get a game? One of the greatest superhero video games of that early 2000s era was that PlayStation 2 Hulk game. I think it was on the PS2 anyway. And it was very basic in its nature, but again, it's about capturing that power fantasy of that hero, and it did that for Hulk. I thought, do I even want to talk about any Avengers characters, since, hate it or love it, Crystal Dynamics did a really good job creating each character's kit in Marvel's Avengers. But it goes back to a point I made with Superman. It feels like the tech is there for that now. The destructible environments could be incredible, and think of something on the scale of like Final Fantasy XVI's Icon battles. The scale of those fights were insane, so could a Hulk game replicate that sense of scale for its biggest showdowns? Of course, it comes back to that same problem of, what do you do with the civilians? Like, you can't just create this game and have Hulk stomping on civilians and going all around the city trying to and just killing people, right? So do you have civilians? Do you make buildings destructible? Or do you do what the Arkham games have tended to do and just shift civilians to one side and not really have some kind of excuse as to why they're not around the city? But I think a Hulk game now more than ever has the potential to be really, really good. Maybe you have it take place off planet and not on Earth itself, or maybe you try and do some kind of World War Hulk story. I don't know. It just feels like the potential is there. And again, it also needs to be a Bruce Banner story as much as it is a Hulk story. Honestly though, I want to get back to DC and really focus on DC, because Marvel games, they've got their shit figured out. And they've got a plethora of games and characters coming to video games. WB and DC are off the back of just two okay games in my eyes. I didn't hate Suicide Squad or Gotham Knights, but I don't love either of them either. I am inherently DC pilled from growing up mainly on DC comics and shows, especially Justice League Unlimited and the Batman animated series. I think because of the MCU's popularity surge, it's easy to forget what an incredibly diverse set of characters DC has. It also goes back to what I mentioned before, in that it's fine to make third-person action games, but make sure they feel different. So in that aspect, something a little bit different, I'd love to see a Deathstroke game. Like, it looks like we are going to get to play as him in Season 4 of Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, but that's not really the Deathstroke experience that I'm after. Ever since we got that teaser at the end of Arkham Origins of what the Suicide Squad would eventually go on to be, I've always just wanted to play as Deathstroke, and sure, they did a great job actually in Arkham Origins as putting him as a challenge character and having you play as him. But for me, what I would love to see is Deathstroke in an Arcane-like game, where you can choose to go full stealth or go full action, and having targets and contracts to fulfill. Come on man, like don't tell me that doesn't sound exciting. Like you can spec into going all guns blazing, or you can try and take that silent assassin approach, and having both scales have different consequences. Deathstroke is the kind of character where, even though he's not inherently good, you could create a quite a compelling and interesting story, and with his kind of arsenal and toolkit, it allows for that replayability and to really spec into a skill tree. On top of that, last week I did a video on the need for a live service superhero game. Some people agreed, some people disagreed, but I still maintain the fact that a PvE live service superhero game would, if done correctly, be massive. No longer putting an under-equipped, renowned single-player studio on a live service game, but instead pairing a studio that knows what they're doing to then go make a live service superhero game. I still think that a DC equivalent of Marvel Heroes would be such a terrific choice. People are like, DC Universe Online, sure, I get it. I said in the video, I've tried to go back, it does feel older now, and I want to be the characters, not make a version of them. But it also goes back to why I think that particular genre and that particular gameplay style is perfectly suited to these heroes, because you can better balance these heroes. Whereas in a third-person action game, playing as Superman versus playing as Black Canary, it's very difficult to balance the two together. It makes playing as Batman feel as fun as playing as Green Lantern. These comic book universe are just so spectacularly built for a live service. It's just like an entire comic book run. One minute you're fighting Vandal Savage, the next minute the Legion of Doom, then the League of Shadows, and then it all culminates with a showdown and apocalypse with Darkseid. Again, I caught some flack for saying just play DC Universe Online, but I want to be these characters, man. And even if they're like, you know what, a live service game, maybe we want to pivot away from that, a DC Ultimate Alliance is just as necessary. All DC has right now when it comes to video games is Batman. At least if I watch a Marvel movie, like the other week I went to watch Deadpool and Wolverine, you've now got the Fortnite Marvel season, but also I can just boot up Ultimate Alliance 3 and play as those characters in there and still get that kind of fantasy that I'm after. DC has no version of that unless you're going all the way back to PlayStation 2 and PSP for DC Heroes, was it called? Or Justice League Heroes? Which, again, for its time was fine, but that's like 20 years ago. I'm ready for a 2024 equivalent of that. And with DC now being willing to license out IP, which they should have done years ago, but is what it is, it's possible that something like this could happen. More likely than a live service, but let's see. Going back a few years, I remember Guardians of the Galaxy being quite skeptical about it when we got our first look, and it was then put in a PlayStation showcase alongside the Spider-Man and Wolverine game, and everyone was kind of like dismissive of it. And it turned out to be a really fantastic game with incredible writing, looked gorgeous, and even though it wasn't a perfect superhero video game, it was a very, very good one and underrated one. And I think one notion of it that wasn't loved by everyone, but I appreciated it, was only playing as Quill and ordering around your little teammates to go and do moves and team up abilities. I thought it was quite neat. I would really like to see that implemented in a DC game like Teen Titans, even Justice League Dark. But let's go as Teen Titans for now. Playing as just Nightwing or Starfire or Beast Boy, and then ordering around the different characters like Raven just to perform team up abilities, I think will lend itself to a pretty good video game. There are murmurs that the next WB Montreal game is going to be a Teen Titans game, which, if that's the case, I'm pretty excited about that. How well that would translate to the combat system of Gotham Knights, I'm not too sure, but I'm willing to wait and see. Often in games, at least for me, rather than getting multiple half-baked character kits, I prefer to get one that is really detailed, that is put a lot of attention in, and it's complemented by team-up attacks. I think about how Dragon Age is pivoting with Veilguard, how Spider-Man in the Insomniac games you team up with like Yuri, and then even the God of War games where Kratos fights with Atreus. The good thing about Teen Titans is that it has not just a plethora of villains that you could add into this game, but it's had multiple iterations, so you could really pick and choose the cast that you really want to go for here. You could go with a young Teen Titans, you could tell a coming of age story, you could tell one where they're trying to pass the mantle on, so it's Nightwing down to maybe Damian as Robin. I think that could be pretty cool as well. I've always loved Teen Titans' story where the League is gone and the emphasis is on them. But with the DC Universe, there is such a rich amount of comics to take inspiration from, stories to take inspiration from, that you could really do anything you wanted to do with them. For sure, if it is like Gotham Knights and the Titans is a co-op game, it could be really sick if they do go down that route. But I also won't be opposed to just playing as Nightwing or Robin or Starfire or Raven or Beast Boy or Cyborg. The Teen Titans have a very different dynamic to the Justice League, but it's one of those where I feel like the power scale is more balanced than what would be a Justice League game where, like, trying to make Batman feel as good as Superman next to Green Lantern, next to Wonder Woman, next to Martian Manhunter. It's such different power scales and different movesets. It'd be interesting for sure. Like, WB doubled down on Suicide Squad as the next big thing after the trinity of Wonder Woman, Batman, and Superman. But for me, the Titans are ripe for that spot. They just need to be given a bigger chance and spotlight. And not to mention, it sounds like we're going to get a Titans project in James Gunn's DCU. Speaking of James Gunn, I know that he mentioned that he'd like to have games take place in the DCU itself. For me, I'm not sure about that. It could be cool, but video game timelines and productions are so different to movie timelines and productions. I also just think, like, why hamper the creativity and the possibilities of what a DC video game can be by having the restrictions of the DCU canon in there? Like, I don't think you need to tie two things together in order for there to be a synergy there. I look at Hogwarts Legacy and the Harry Potter movies. Yes, they're in the same universe, for example, but they don't really tie together much. Same with the DC. You can have a successful Superman game alongside a Superman movie, and they will synergize. But trying to put them on the same timeline, the same time scale, is going to lead to crunch and probably a bad product. Like, look at the Spider-Man games. When I go and play Marvel Spider-Man 2, I want to go and watch Into the Spider-Verse or Across the Spider-Verse or any of the Spider-Man movies after it. They don't need to be inherently linked. The IP is strong enough for the two to synergize together. Like, I would rather just play a Superman game where we go up against Brainiac or Lex Luthor or Doomsday than have it serve like some beeline plot just to serve a movie. I mean, there's so many ideas, so many superheroes that lend themselves brilliantly to video games, and there's only so many that I could cover in this video alone. Maybe I'll make a part 2 on this, but for now, I want to know, what are you thinking? What superheroes have not gotten a video game that really deserve one? And give me a pitch for them. What kind of game would you love to see? Do any of the games that I mentioned tickle your pickle? Anything you want to expand on from those? And if you do have one in mind, what studio would you love to see make it? I'd love to hear your suggestions in the comments down below. I'd love to talk with you down there. Other than that, if you enjoyed the video, hear me just ramble on about the things that I really love talking about, then dropping a like helps me. I really appreciate that. And if you're after more of this kind of content, talking about the things I just really enjoy, specifically when it comes to comic book video games, consider subscribing. I would love for you to stick around. Other than that, all my socials are linked in the description down below, so you can get at me there if you have anything else for me. As always, I hope you have a terrific day. Look after yourself, and I'll catch you in the next one.